Hi everyone. So originally when I had thought about doing a training diary, I was like, oh, I'll just record something after my runs, and the reality is that I do way too many runs for that. So, which is often how things end up going, is like I sort of start level going, yeah, that's completely unachievable, and then I like scale it back to something that's actually going to work. So I thought that I would start to do something that's more on a weekly basis, and just for anyone who is interested, and not so much for the training, but there's always things that you learn sort of week to week, and it's sort of just easy to let them sort of like float over you, but having a space to sort of like talk about it and look at those specific things through the week just helps you integrate it a bit better. Which is why I think it's great to have a training diary, not just from the purely, like the stats point of view, which I think is really helpful, because you can look back on it. Like before Canberra, I wanted to see what my best lead up had been in terms of like when I stopped strength training and that kind of thing. And because I have a training diary that goes back until 2013, I have a pretty big amount of data to draw from there. So from that point of view, it's really good. But I think it's also just really good to keep you engaged with the process and not going through the motions, particularly if you are choosing to have a coach like I do, or somebody's writing a plan for you. Then like you want to make sure it's not something that you're just like ticking a box to do the thing that the person told you to do, because that is, after a while, it starts to feel a little bit like a chore and not something that you chose. So it's always good to have that kind of thing. So this last week was, so I had the Canberra run, which in a lot of ways it was really interesting because it was a lot better than I thought that it would go. Both like in terms of the time, like I was just hoping to get like anything under like 1:39:59 I would have been happy with. And it seems like a small thing to be aiming for 1:39 and get 1:36, but at that sort of, for me, that's actually like a really huge difference. So I was super happy with the time, but also super happy that I managed it on the day, because I did not feel particularly good going into it, although I think a lot of that was just nerves. And there was a lot more elevation than I had necessarily prepared for. I knew there was a bit, but I think it's also like the nature of the course is you're doing these kind of like hairpin turns, and so you can see everyone going up when you're going down, and you're like, I've got to do that. So to still be able to maintain my most aggressive pacing goal, dealing with that, I was really happy with. But it also put me, like with training, into a little, you always have that sort of like post-event come down, and you kind of expect that, but it also kind of put me like in a bit of a hole, sort of like mojo wise, for training, because it's kind of like, well, I've like far exceeded what I was going for here, and because in terms of all-time PBs, it was, I guess, 3 or 4 minutes, but in terms of like, since I'd done my last race, it's actually more like a 10-minute PB, so it's like way beyond what I was going for. And so then you're kind of like, okay, so like what am I doing now? Like I've got sort of like races booked in, but there's that sort of tension of, okay, but like going faster than that is really, really intimidating, because I had not envisaged really getting to that goal until the end of the year. So it kind of like puts a little bit more pressure on, but then you've also got this thing of like, oh, well, I achieved way more than I wanted, so I just like relax here for a little bit. But that is when sort of like having somebody write your plans for you helps, which definitely I just like kept doing what I was doing. And so the week after Canberra, was pretty cruisy. I had on there an easy run the day after, which would be a first for me, but because I was traveling, I skipped that. And then I had like a few rest days after that, and then I sort of started to run again afterwards. Like in terms of recovery, I probably felt better than I have after pretty much any other run, which I think is where something like where I'm running relatively high volume. Like for some people it would be super high volume. For me, I would consider it relatively high volume. One of the benefits of that is, even though a faster run is a lot more high impact and it's a lot more taxing on the system, like in terms of like managing that distance, when I'm used to running 100, 120 kilometers a week, and you're sort of having that taper period, so you're running less through the week, I did find that I recovered so much better from that. So that went pretty well. Started to get back into training, but also as you might have noticed, there was some sort of like some business changes going on, and that was pretty stressful. So that sort of like took a lot of my attention when I came back, and so was sort of still doing what I needed to do through the week. And then last week, so it was sort of like the first week that I was having like a real like back to full speed, and I could see on my training plan I was coming up to, like I had on the, I guess it was like on the Sunday, I'd had this sort of like double workout day, which is always super challenging, but going into it I knew that I had like a calf niggle, which is sort of one of those things that you just learn. Like I'm pretty used to going to CrossFit and then running afterwards, but on this particular day it was sort of like a moderately paced 16-kilometer run that I'd split in two, and then at CrossFit we'd done sort of like some jumping, and I just, with like a combination of that and fatigue, I just like overtaxed the calf, and I could feel that it was not great. But I was like, it's probably just tight, I'll just run through it, which, you know, I wouldn't run past the point of like, I know what, you know, like what a actual tear feels like, so I would not run through that. But on the day I was like, it just feels tight. So I ran through it, and for the most part it was kind of weird, must just have been where it was strained. Like all of the fast sort of sprinty type stuff was great, but all of the slow stuff, easy stuff, was kind of uncomfortable. And that night when I got home, so I had sort of like some threshold stuff in the morning and then some hill sprints in the evening, and I noticed that it was a little bit swollen. I was like, okay, well, I'm definitely not running tomorrow. So for that week, then I just, I knew that I had like a couple of easy days after that, because that's sort of like a big day. So I swam in place of those. One was just pure easy. It was 10K easy, so I did an hour easy at the pool. And then the next day was 12K easy, including some sprints. So I did my hour at the pool, and then I did some sprints on the bike at home. And I'd kind of hoped that I would be like a little bit better for the Wednesday, because I had a 30K run. But I also knew that even if I was okay, I wouldn't be right to run 30Ks at a moderate pace that day. And it was getting better, but it was still needing more time. So I did that to like about 2 3/4 hours on the bike. It was relatively hellish, and I was really sore afterwards. But it's just in those situations, it's, if anything, that long period of injury and rehab taught me is just maintain the habits. If I'd sort of gone, okay, well, you know, like now I've got this calf strain and I've only just done a race, so this is an excellent opportunity for me to just do absolutely nothing, and then it's just so much harder to get into the swing of things, when, you know, in reality, like a few days later it was fine. So then on the Thursday I felt like it was okay enough to test it out. So I did 45 minutes, which is usually my go-to for something that is long enough to sort of like test how everything's feeling, but it's not going to deplete any glycogen, and it's not going to put like a huge demand on your muscles, which is what you really want to protect at that stage, is any kind of fatigue happening in the muscles. So that felt pretty good. It was good enough that I was almost tempted to do the 12Ks that was on my plan, but I stuck to that 45 minutes and then did a bit more at the pool. And then the next day was another easy running day, so I did that, and that was all fine. So so then I was able to sort of get back into things over the weekend. But on the Saturday, like, I took an unplanned rest day, just because I felt a little bit tired, possibly from the bike, and on my plan was something that was sort of like at that 10K pace, and I was not convinced that my legs were quite at that level just yet. So I decided to take an extra rest day, particularly sort of like just to, like, that weekend was Mother's Day weekend, and so which we don't really do anything for, but I knew I'd be doing very little on Sunday, so it was sort of kind of a good opportunity to take that extra rest. And then on Sunday I went and did 16 kilometers, which felt really good. I didn't feel like I had any niggles, so then I felt more confident to go into this week and know that I wasn't sort of in danger of like re-aggravating anything. And so it was really good to sort of do that. And then I had like an easy day on Monday, and on Tuesday was a workout day, which is generally my pattern, tends to go workout day, 2 easy days, workout day. So yeah, so it was also one that I looked at and I was like, oh, looks a bit spicy. So it was 5 kilometers at half pace, and then like a bit of recovery, and then 5 3-minute hill repeats at sort of like 10 kilometer intensity. And with things like that, and then there was some like 200 meter like faster reps, like not on hills but just on the flat to finish off. With things like that, because my workouts do tend to have these sections, I 100% only focus on like, all I've got to do is run for 5Ks and be fine. And so I did that, and I'm like, cool, all I got to do is do these hill repeats, and did that. And I always sort of, it's interesting how your brain works, because like I always kind of go, oh, you know, like I do not look forward to hill work. Like I love doing sort of like moderate or easy runs on rolling hills. I really love that. But I don't think anyone, I guess, really looks forward to hill sprints or hill repeats. Although hill sprints are only ever sort of 8 to 12 seconds, so they're pretty fun. But, you know, 3 minutes uphill, I thought, oh, that's going to be really rough. But when I get into it, I actually really enjoy it, because it's sort of like, there's no, like, I'm not going there, oh, should I speed up? Because I'm just, you know, it's, the effort is what it is. And then you're kind of like jogging back down. So you don't have, like in times when I've had sort of like more maximal sprints, and then you sort of get to the bottom and you got to wait for another like few minutes or whatever, it's almost too much time to think about it. With hill repeats, where you're going up at a kind of, at a high effort, but not a max effort, and then you're jogging back down, there's no time to think about it. And you're just sort of really going up, and then you're cool, get to jog down. And 5 is like a pleasing amount to do, because, you know, like by the time you sort of do 1, you're like practically in the middle, and it's mentally, it's easy to wrap your head around. So that was quite good. And I was really pleased with all of that pace work and all of that hill work. My calf had no dramas. So again, just sort of cemented that, yep, we're absolutely good to go. And so then I had a couple of easy, well, the next day was sort of like about 18 kilometer moderate, and then I had an easy day, and then today I had 15-minute threshold progression. So it's basically 15 minutes of like 5 minutes at sort of like guesstimated marathon pace, 5 minutes sort of in between marathon and half marathon, and 5 minutes at half marathon, and then like a 1 minute float in between. So it's not sort of like, it's not slow running in between, it's just sort of like not as fast running in between. And I've done this session before and I actually really like it. Like I like having it broken up into those like 5 minute blocks. It's really easy to wrap your head around, and the first 5 minutes, because it's at marathon pace, it feels relatively easy because you've just had that rest. And the last bit at half marathon pace also feels okay because you know you're about to get the rest, and it's only really that middle section where, you know, like you kind of like have to stay within yourself to get it done. So I did that. There was no sprints at the end, which was a nice change. So that was my week, which coming off the calf issue was really, really nice. And what I've been doing this week is after my workout days, which is also today, I've been going for a swim afterwards. It's like sort of like 30 minutes in the afternoon. It just helps to keep, like, one of the things that can definitely happen to me that I'm prone to is just my feet getting a little bit locked up. And so having all of that movement in the water is really good for my feet, and I really enjoy it. It's super slow, but it's also one of those things where it's kind of like, it's a good thing for me, where I'm not really trying to get any better at swimming. I just do it because I enjoy it. So it's kind of like one of those restorative things where I don't have to kind of like, I don't concern myself with how inefficient my stride is, or stroke rather, not stride, but how inefficient that is, or, you know, how slow I am, or anything else. I just go and I swim. I enjoy being in the water, and locally we've got an outdoor pool that's heated, so it's, when the weather is nice, it's really nice because you're out in the sunshine, and it's super close to home. So even though there's always that bit of a thing to me like, oh god, I gotta like get so much things together, I need swimmers and towels and goggles, and I gotta drive there and all that sort of stuff, it's actually around the corner and I could walk there. So that makes it super easy. And when I looked, I knew I wanted to incorporate it, but also knew I had to look at my week and work out where that was going to happen. And one of the things that I notice is I tend to hit like a bit of an energy dip at around that 2 to 3 o'clock mark, where I'm not really don't have a tendency to be overly productive at that time anyway. So sort of breaking up the day by going and doing the swim is a really nice thing. And I think it has sort of like helped some of my recovery this week, particularly like going into like quite a high week after the race and after having like a bit of a break and everything. And particularly given that I've got 30Ks to run on Sunday. So having working all of that stuff in there is a good thing. And also because with some of the business changes, with sort of like looking at downsizing, and I'm only doing Learn to Run 3 times a year now, and so I've sort of had to cut back on some of the stuff I do, which is sort of like which, you know, everyone has to do with when they have sort of like changes in work in the family, you know, like it's not an unusual thing at all to have to do. The conversation with the kids, and they're like, are we done saving money yet? And I'm like, no, we're not. So part of that has been I've had to, at least for now, stop doing personal training, and also like some of the more regular body treatments that I would get in terms of sports massage and osteo treatment. I've had to kind of go, I'm going to just really have to scale back on that for now. And, you know, like the positives of that have been, you know, like as things are moving towards that sort of downsizing, is I do have more time, like to do things like this. And so there, lifestyle wise, I think it has been like a huge win. But it does mean, and I think the calf thing highlights this, is I need to be 100% on my own body maintenance, because I think like having like sports massages every couple of weeks has it's been really helpful, but I also think that having that there means that at times I've been more lazy with doing that sort of stuff myself. So I've sort of like this week tried to incorporate like do more stretching, do more stability, do more rolling, you know, and just gonna have to sort of like during this period of time while I adapt to the new situation, just do more of that stuff for myself. And you know, so I've also been sort of incorporating some rolling routines before and after a run. When I do that, I was like, oh yeah, there's some quad stuff going on there, which I know from my massages, like where the problem areas are. So all of that has been happening this week, and so yeah, I get my new training plan that won't come in until the end of the week, so I have no real idea what I'm doing next week beyond that. I've got my long run this weekend, and so yeah, that's pretty much all that's been going on here, and I will speak to you next week, and hopefully that's something that I'll be able to maintain.